Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. We are about to jump into a really dense 15-minute argument by Oxford mathematician John Lennox that it completely challenges the idea that you have to choose between science and God. In the next few minutes, we're going to cover why gravity doesn't replace a creator, why atheism might actually undermine the reliability of your own brain, and, my favorite part, how a cake baked by a woman named Aunt Matilda explains the limits of scientific observation better than I think any textbook ever could.
It's a fantastic speech, and we're looking at a specific breakdown of it from the channel Daily Dose of Wisdom.
Yeah.
He gave this talk at the Oxford Union, and I think the context is so important.
Yeah.
He isn't talking to, a friendly church crowd. He's in a room full of intellectuals, probably a lot of skeptics, and he's making the case that faith and reason aren't enemies. Actually, they're deeply connected.
He's definitely not taking the easy route. And before we really dive into the heavy lifting of these arguments, I just want to say, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. It really helps us keep these deep dives going. Okay, so let's get into that first major conflict Lennox takes on, this whole God versus science debate.
Right, and the popular idea is that as science moves forward, God has to retreat.
It's a zero-sum game.
Exactly. But Lennox just dismantles that whole premise right at the start with what might be my favorite analogy in, well, all of apologetics.
You have to be talking about the Henry Ford analogy.
Of course.
I love it because it just perfectly exposes this category error we make all the time.
Yeah.
Lennox says asking someone to choose between God and science to explain reality.
It's like asking them to choose between Henry Ford and engineering to explain a motor car.
And it just clicks. It frames the problem perfectly.
It does. I mean, if you want to understand a car, you can study the engine.
Yeah.
You can learn all the physics, the thermodynamics, the mechanics. That's the mechanism. That's science.
And you can get a totally complete explanation of how the car works.
Without ever once mentioning the name Henry Ford.
But, and this is the kicker, if you then turn around and say, because I understand the engine, Henry Ford must not exist, you've completely lost your mind.
Precisely. You're confusing mechanism with agency.
Mm.
Henry Ford is the agent, the who. Engineering is the mechanism, the how.
Mm-hmm.
And Lennox's whole point is that God is the agent. Science is just the study of the mechanism he created.
They're not competing explanations.
Not at all. They're complementary. You need both for the full picture.
It's so strange we don't see that distinction more often. We act like the mechanism replaces the agent. And Lennox brings up Isaac Newton to show this wasn't always the case.
Oh, absolutely not. I think a lot of people forget that when Newton discovered the law of gravity, he didn't stand up and say, great, I have a law, so I don't need God anymore.
It was the complete opposite, wasn't it?
The complete opposite. He wrote the Principia Mathematica, hoping it would persuade thinking people to believe in a deity. He saw the law and concluded there must be a lawgiver.
So arguably the greatest scientific mind of his time saw the laws of physics as direct evidence for God. But now you have, brilliant people like Stephen Hawking, who Lennox mentions, saying that because there's a law of gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing.
And that's where we get to the cosmological argument, or really the logical problem of something from nothing. Lennox has a big issue with that idea.
This part gets a little bit tangled in logic, but it's so important. He attacks the very sentence, the universe created itself.
He says it's a contradiction in terms. For something, let's say, X, to create Y, X has to exist first.
Right.
But if X creates X...
then X has to exist before it exists.
It's logical nonsense, and he's very blunt about it. He says, and I'm paraphrasing, nonsense remains nonsense, even if high-powered scientists are the ones saying it.
It's that G.K. Chesterton idea the source brings up.
Yeah.
That we think it's absurd for a God to make everything from nothing. But somehow we think it's perfectly plausible for nothing to turn itself into everything.
It really shows that both worldviews require a belief in something. Well, something that looks like a miracle. Either an eternal mind created the universe, or the universe just popped into existence without a cause. Lennox is just arguing that one of those options respects logic and the other one doesn't.
Okay, but logic is one thing. What about the physical evidence? What happens when you actually point a telescope at the sky?
Well, this is where Lennox brings in Arno Penzias.
The Nobel Prize winner.
The Nobel Prize winner who discovered the cosmic microwave background radiation. He's a serious witness.
Yeah.
And Penzias said that astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe created out of nothing, with this incredibly delicate balance of conditions that are just right for life.
The fine-tuning argument.
Exactly. The force of gravity, the cosmological constant. If any of these were off by just a hair, we wouldn't be here to talk about it.
And Penzias saw that as
Evidence of a supernatural plan. His words.
So you've got the hardware of the universe pointing towards a creator. But then Lennox shifts gears to something I think even more profound. The software. Our own minds. This was the part of the talk where I really had to just pause, because he challenges the atheist on their home turf, reason itself.
This is the argument from reason, and it all goes back to what Einstein famously said.
The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible.
Exactly. Why should it be? Why should the math happening inside your head match the movement of planets light years away?
It's what's called the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. A physicist can sit in a dark room, scribble some equations on a board, and they turn out to perfectly describe how a galaxy spins. It's bizarre.
If the universe is just a chaotic accident, there's no reason for it to be mathematically elegant, and there's certainly no reason our primate brains should be able to decode it.
And that leads into what I think is the most devastating philosophical point of the whole argument. Lennox argues that if you are a strict naturalist, a hardline atheist, you actually lose the grounds to trust your own mind.
This is the evolutionary argument against naturalism. It's often linked with the philosopher Alvin Plantinga, and it's a real problem for skeptics. So the argument goes like this. If atheism is true, your mind is just the product of unguided, mindless evolution.
Survival of the fittest.
Correct. The driving forces are survival and reproduction. The driving force is not truth.
So, okay, walk me through that. Let's say I'm an early human. I hear a rustle in the grass. I form a belief. There's a tiger in there.
Okay.
But what if it's just the wind? It doesn't matter. My belief is false, but because I run away, I survive.
Exactly. Your false belief was beneficial for your survival. Evolution rewards behavior that keeps you alive, not beliefs that are necessarily true.
So if my brain was built for survival, for running away from tigers, not for discovering deep metaphysical truths, why on earth should I trust it when it comes to a conclusion like atheism is true?
That's the trap. If you reduce the mind to just chemistry and biology aimed at survival, you've just undermined the reliability of the very tool you're using to reach your conclusions.
So atheism ends up being self-defeating. It saws off the branch it's sitting on.
And Lennox argues that theism offers a much more coherent explanation. The reason in here, in our minds, matches the reason out there in the universe.
Is because they have a common source.
A common, rational, intelligent source. They were both made by the same mind.
That neatly bridges the gap between the mind and the universe. But there's another gap he moves to, and it's one that's more emotional. Morality.
Right, and this is where conversations usually get pretty heated. But he makes a really important distinction right away. He is not saying that you have to believe in God to be a good person.
No, not at all. He acknowledges many atheists are incredibly moral people. The question isn't, can you be good without God?
The question is, can you explain why good exists without God?
It's the difference between knowing what time it is and knowing how a clock works.
That's a good way to put it. And he brings up Jürgen Habermas, a major German philosopher who's also a secular atheist.
And Habermas admits that all the concepts we cherish, human rights, freedom, democracy,
they didn't just pop out of nowhere. Habermas says they are the direct legacy of the Judaic ethic of justice and the Christian ethic of love.
And he says everything else is just postmodern chatter.
That is a huge admission. Because if you remove that foundation, the idea that every person is made in the image of God, you lose any objective reason to say a person has more value than a rock.
If we're just matter in motion, then human rights is just a story we tell ourselves.
And Lennox makes this really concrete. He talks about his time in Russia, speaking to a scientist there. And the scientist told him, "We thought we could get rid of God, but keep human values."
And what was the conclusion?
He said, "We found we couldn't, and we murdered millions of them." It's just a chilling echo of Solzhenitsyn's line.
We have forgotten God.
And when you remove the agent, the mechanism, the human being, can become expendable.
It's a heavy thought. But I want to swing back to science for a minute, because there's one more analogy he uses that I think just clears up so much confusion. We had Henry Ford.
And now we have Aunt Matilda.
The Aunt Matilda cake analogy. It's just brilliant.
Just simple.
Okay, so the setup is Aunt Matilda bakes a cake. And we bring in the world's best scientists to study it.
Right. You get the nutritionists, they tell you the calorie count. You get the biochemists, they explore the proteins.
The physicists can analyze the fundamental particles, the quarks.
You can get a 100% complete, scientifically accurate description of the cake's mechanism.
You know how the cake exists.
Oh.
But, and this is the point, all of that science cannot answer the single most important question.
Why was the cake made?
Was it for a birthday? A wedding? An apology?
The scientists could study that cake for 1,000 years. They will never find the purpose under a microscope. The mechanism doesn't reveal the purpose.
And that's the limit of science. Lennox is saying we can study the universe, the cake, as much as we want. But if you want to know the why,
You're dependent on the baker to tell you.
Aunt Matilda has to step in and say, I made this for my nephew's birthday. That's revelation.
Exactly. And that's his pivot from just a generic creator god to Christianity specifically. He's arguing the baker has revealed the purpose.
He calls this the crunch issue. And I really respect that he doesn't just stay in the clouds of philosophy. He stakes everything on a claim of history.
The resurrection. He makes it completely binary. He says, look, if Jesus rose from the dead, then atheism is false. If he didn't, then Christianity is false. End of story.
It's not about a feeling. It's a verdict on an alleged event.
Right. And he quotes Sir Norman Anderson, who was a brilliant legal mind who examined the evidence like a court case. Anderson concluded the empty tomb was a veritable rock that all the alternative theories just shatter against.
So Lennox is basically saying if you just apply normal historical standards to the evidence, it's surprisingly strong.
But even if you accept all that, the logic, the fine-tuning, the history, there's still that huge emotional wall for so many people.
The problem of pain.
Yeah. And he doesn't shy away from it. He talks about his own niece dying from a tumor at 22. It's the hardest objection. How can a good God allow this?
And what's his answer?
Well, he argues that while it's a massive problem for the Christian, it's actually a fatal problem for the atheist.
How so?
Because if atheism is true, that's it. Death is the end. There is no ultimate justice for his niece or for anyone who suffers. They just die, and the universe doesn't notice. Atheism gets rid of the problem of evil, but it also gets rid of any hope for justice.
So it leaves you with the pain, but takes away the hope.
Right. And the Christian answer he puts forward isn't some philosophical platitude. It's the cross. He asks, what is God doing on a cross? The claim is that God didn't stay distant from our suffering. He entered into it. He became part of it.
And because of the resurrection, the story isn't over. There's a promise that justice is coming.
It reframes everything. And he talks about this not as a theory, but as a relationship. He talks about personal peace, about forgiveness. It's not just intellectual assent.
The host of the Source video wraps this all up by calling it a tapestry. And I think that's the perfect way to look at this whole deep dive. We've covered a lot. Ford cars, tigers in the grass, cakes.
But they're not separate arguments. That's the key. Lennox is weaving them together. The science, the philosophy of mind, the moral instinct, the historical evidence, they're all threads that, he argues, weave together to form one coherent picture.
So it's not a blind leap of faith. He's saying it's more like a step into the light based on where the evidence is pointing.
It's trusting the baker because you've tasted the cake and maybe you've read the note. He left.
So I guess that's the question we'll leave you with. Science can explain the ingredients of your life, your DNA, your chemistry, the neurons firing in your brain as you listen to this, but it can't explain the purpose. So are you content with just knowing the recipe? Or are you looking for the baker?
That is the question.
Thanks for thinking deeper with us. We'll see you next time.